webinar on agribusiness organized by the School of Business Executive Education in partnership with Lagos Business School and with the collaboration of the American Chamber of Commerce and the Federation of Egyptian Industry. In a previous webinar, we discussed the growing potential of the agriculture sector and how can agribusinesses survive pressures and challenges. Today, we are getting into another discussion where we will learn more about the opportunities emerging in the agribusiness industries. The speakers will address the innovations in the agribusiness, where the use of technology and the proper use of resources can improve output. Also, how to make the agriculture sector a more innovative rather than being stereotyped as a traditional sector that is unattractive for the young population. Finally, our speakers will provide a holistic view of the sector while identifying comparatively the country competitiveness by looking at the agribusiness value chain. Please join me in welcoming our speakers for today. In order of speaking, Mr. Tawfik, the chairman of the Cairo Poultry Group and the deputy chairman of the Federation of Egyptian Industries, Mr. Hatem Ezzawy, the managing director of PICO and the deputy chairman of the AmCham Agriculture Committee, Dr. Aiki, the program director of Lagos Business School, the agribusiness program. If you have any questions during the session, please direct them to me in the chat box. Thank you all. Mr. Tarek, the floor is all yours, and I will be sharing the presentation for you now.
Thank you very much, Dina. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Let me just start, my intervention looking at the challenges that are meeting the world, basically. We're talking about, shall I be telling you to move to the other page? Okay, yes. Basically, about challenges that are impacting almost every country in varying degrees. Climate change is a reality. Population growth in our part of the world is becoming a real challenge, that's impacting security, and again, water scarcity, whether that is by nature, geographical nature, or because again, these are reality that we have to contend with. Please, the second one, please. In view of this, with all the challenges that are facing the world, there are two different schools of thought, one of which is looking at it future of scarcity, and another approach, or a more optimistic approach is looking at it with the advent of technology, notably in the field of technology, biotechnology, and agriculture, look at it as a future of abundance that will serve almost every individual worldwide. Please, we move to the other one. The second slide, please. It's not the case of Egypt, I think, a bit more, to a great extent, fits this profile. We're not any different from anybody. Climate change is impacting us. We have the challenge of water scarcity when it comes, notably, with the Renaissance Dam down in Ethiopia, let alone, the population growth. And the way we're using water, I mean, we are being categorized as a water scarce country. Our per capita allocation of water is less than 600 cubic meters a year, and this puts us in this category of water scarcity. Can we move, please, Dina, the slides forward? Again, further, please. Further, please. We need to have to look at, more of a situation of where we are today in Egypt. Agriculture is one of the few sectors that has been mostly deregulated. It's a private sector is the main player in the market, more or less. The economy of agriculture is dealing with a market economy that is based on supply and demand, pure supply and demand. There are exceptions, of course, of government intervention in some crops and fertilizers, but generally speaking, this is one of the more deregulated sectors in the economy at large. Please remove second slide. And again, when we characterize Egypt, we have to be very careful what we're talking about, because we have old agriculture that is very conventional tradition, traditional, namely in the Delta and the Valley region, that is centered around the Nile. And then we have the new agriculture, which is in the newly developed areas, west and eastern of Delta, in desert lands, and this has been recently the backbone of our exports, our industry, of our development. And you will see the discrepancy between these two economies. One is still very primitive to a great extent, and the other one has economies of scale whereby some of the latest technologies is being applied. Second slide, please. But when we look at Egypt, again, I look at it as a country of opportunity. When we look at the impediments that we have or the problems that are plaguing the agricultural economy, these can be easily transformed into an opportunity by proper management and proper utilization of our resources. Water management is very poor. We are using 80% of our water in Nile water in agriculture, with an efficiency rate of primitive irrigation systems of close to 50%. Let alone, we have a very high percentage of wastage in our crops, that can go up 35% in some crops due to poor upstream and downstream logistics. We also are witnessing, namely in the old land, low crop yields, poor policies of agricultural application, very poor or non-existent extension service that did exist in the past. Seed production is monopolized by certain entities, whereby the farmer is not necessarily getting the optimum quality of seeds, whereby he can increase his vertical yields. The credit finance is also one of the main impediments, and there is only one bank that allocates finance or small and medium-sized finance for companies, which is the Agricultural Bank of Egypt, but other banks shy away entirely from financing any agricultural activities, let alone, with the decimation of the agricultural plots in the Delta region. We don't have any collecting farmers, or actually the cooperatives that are existing, to a great extent are dysfunctional. This characterizes the old land, but in the new land, you do see big plots of areas with economies of scale, and better utilization of resources of water and logistics at large. We have also other impediments, when it has to do with land registration and land allocation and land ownership, because again, in agriculture, which is a long-term investment, having the security of a registered land or an owned land gives you the ability to invest on long-term basis. Our utilization of crops, into industry is very limited, very poor. When we look at tomatoes, for example, no more than 5% of the total crop is being processed. Some other crops, like sugars, there is more than 90% utilization. Other crops, like in vegetables, and the utilization does not exceed 20%. Potatoes is another exception, whereby we see maybe 40 to 50% of utilization. As we see in developed countries, like in Portugal, 80% of the tomato crops is utilized in value addition and industry. So this creates, again, a huge opportunity. All these challenges that we're talking about create a huge opportunity of adding value and utilizing the resources that we have. Next slide, please. There are many, we have to have a different mindset, we have to think in view of maximizing our return for every cubic meter of water, we cannot think of self-dependence when it comes to crops that are pure commodities, let alone something like corn, like wheat, which we are importing. If we put in our mindset that we are importing more than 50 billion cubic meters of water in the form of crops like corn and meat and maize and soybean and the edible oils, this is a luxury this is a reality that we have to contend with, because we don't have the luxury of producing them to give self-sufficiency. In retrospect, the whole mindset has to be focused on high-value export crops, high-value industrial crops, where we create value and have better utilization of better monetary utilization of every cubic meter of water. We also have to look at increasing vertical yields, improving logistics. Vertical yields has to do with better crop rotation, with better seeds, with better fertilizer application, and using technology, as I will talk about shortly in this presentation. When we talk about logistics, there are the pre-upstream logistics, what has to do with research and development, and applied research. Upstream has to do with the logistics of harvesting and post-harvesting. Midstream logistics has to do with storage, warehousing. Cold chain. Downstream, again, is availing other products on the retail level, whereby you have the proper facilities of display and a cold chain application. Next slide, please. And in view of what I just said, applying, when we talk about the future of abundance, other countries have had great advances in biogenetics, artificial intelligence, renewable energies, desalination technology, nanotechnology that are applied in the field of agriculture. Agriculture is not anymore tilling the land and sitting and waiting for the crop to come. The agriculture is employing some of the highest technologies worldwide when it comes to information technology and biogenetics, which means in many different becoming one of the more attractive sectors, for entrepreneurs, and more attractive sectors for young individuals, bright individuals to, unlike, the past, whereby, technology has been a very low impact technology on the agricultural aspect. I'll just give you a few examples, Next slide, next slide, yes. As we speak, it's a reality, that drones are using artificial intelligence, in mapping the soils, mapping the crops, identifying the weak points when it comes to fertilizers into crop yields. So it's more of precision agriculture and micromanagement, and this is a technology that is used by a layman. It's an off-the-shelf technology. It's not confined to the bigger company. Actually, these are technologies applied even in developed countries, notably like in a lot of African countries are employing it, and India is another good example, and it's still prohibited here in Egypt, for security reasons, but this is an area that requires a lot of attention, whereby we can increase our agricultural output dramatically. Robotics are being employed in the field right now, whereby they identify the herbs and they pluck it out. They can identify shortages in fertilizers and apply it. So again, and this is again a technology that is used by a layman, by any farmer in Europe or in the United States. This falls under the title of precision agriculture. And I would like to also mention something about modern greenhouses. Modern greenhouses, just to give you a figure, our crop yields in tomatoes in Egypt is somewhere on an average of 15 tons to 20 tons per acre. In modern greenhouses, the crop yields can exceed 800 tons per acre. Utilization of water, 1 kilogram of tomatoes in Egypt will use more than 160, 170 liters of water. In these modern greenhouses, utilization is then less than 2 liters per kilogram of tomatoes. And this is where I see as a potential future of abundance. The reality is, by the technology does exist right now at the highest yield with the lowest usage of water. It's still expensive, but again, like anything else, with the application of such technology across the board, you can see that we have an opportunity worldwide to have enough food to feed the entire world. Next slide, please. The main message, and this is where I will wrap up, is that we have to change the mindset of the country here in Egypt when it comes to policymakers and the community that is still sticking to old past slogans, like self-sufficiency, like the water is a God-given merit to every individual for free. And we have to be focusing on more sustainable agriculture, higher returns, monetary returns, better nutrition and better nutritional mix for our population, and a food safety aspect. All these combined puts us on the map, of sustainability, puts us on the map of better utilization of resources, puts us on the map of exporting our products, let alone, I mean, there has been advances in exports over the last 20 years where, whereby the private sector is exporting more than 5 million tons of horticultural or agricultural products, none of which include rice or cotton, which were the staple items that used to be exported in the past. And again, when we talk about the value addition in processed food, this year we're exceeding more than $3 billion of processed food, to the world. So, I mean, the outcome of agricultural products in agriculture and industrial goods, is well in excess of $5.5 billion. The challenge is that we have the potential, to reach a good 20 to 25 billion in a short period of time if we employ, the different methods and the technology as mentioned. I leave it right there. I hope I did exceed my time, I believe, but I will stop right here. Thank you very much, Dina.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tarek. Actually, you went slightly beyond time, but again, it was very interesting. So I don't think anyone was bothered by that at all. Thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. After we heard this coverage from Mr. Tarek, let's move to our second speaker, Mr. Hatem, and see how to attract the young ones to the agribusiness environment and how to start looking at it or addressing it from a demand side perspective more. Mr. Hatem, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Tarek, for this very comprehensive outline. It really touches on every point, and it's going to be very difficult to find any point.
You're the expert. You have your feet on the ground. I don't anymore.
Basically, if you can share the presentation, thank you very much. And I just touched on a few points that as Dina has mentioned, we see a lot of new entrants into the field every year, and these are some of the challenges that I believe they face and sort of run into. The idea is innovation and demand-driven agriculture. This is what I would like to address. More than often, we find that new entrants are starting at the wrong side of the value chain. They sort of look at what the big companies are doing today and what is the general supply pattern out of Egypt. So they see that big companies are working in citrus exports or grapes exports or potato exports, for example, and then they just start to copy and find the seedlings and start to grow that product. And once they are done on that side, they start to look for the market. I think this has been a challenging approach for most of them. And many of them have not been able to find success in this manner. I would like to advise or see that more of the younger entrants start on the market side. So can we go to the next slide? Basically, with demand-driven agriculture, the most important thing is to understand where the unmet need or the unmet demand is within a specific target market. We understand what Egypt grows. We understand what could be grown in Egypt, but the marketplace globally is massive, and there are so many opportunities outside what we currently grow. So we should be looking at this from a demand-driven value creation approach, rather than let's copy what the big companies are doing or what the incumbents or the established players are doing in the market. So if you can start by identifying that unmet demand within a specific target market, then you have started at the right approach, and then we can reverse engineer from that point. Secondly, it's not just important to look at global market demand of tomatoes, for example, or global market demand of whatever product you're interested in growing. You need to understand the gap. So there is a window of export that can match a certain supply pattern. So for example, Egypt exports strawberries in the months of November, December, January, and February. During these months, there is a gap between supply and demand, which enables Egyptian exporters to penetrate global markets at quite attractive prices. So once you identify the unmet demand, you can look at price patterns, and you can start to basically look at the volatility in price patterns, and that could offer very valuable information and insight into gaps between supply and demand. So for example, if you look at the grapes prices throughout the year, throughout the 12 months, and you see a peak in June and a peak in November, then you can pretty much clearly understand that there is a gap between supply and demand in that specific bracket, and therefore you can work backwards from that point and see. So basically, if you see a spike in the price of grapes globally in June, and you can produce that product in Egypt at that time, then this is a real opportunity that you can work with. So my point in that specific segment is demand-driven. Start by identifying your unmet demand in the market. Use the price patterns to understand where the gap between supply and demand is, and then be specific. Shortlist your products of interest, shortlist the packaging formats, and most importantly, the quality parameters required by the customer. These are very important points, and these are challenges that have been faced, and some new entrants have succeeded in overcoming them. But unfortunately, we've seen that many were unable to get to that final point. So once you understand the product that the market requires, the gap between supply and demand based on the price volatility, the packaging format, the product form, and most important, the quality parameter, then we can work backwards and start to look at logistics. And if we can move to the next slide, the second point that comes from this. So you've outlined your market and your demand. Then you need to start finding your edge. Basically, every customer globally now is the first question that you will be asked if you are trying to sell a product to, say, a Tesco in the United Kingdom, or an Edeka or a Lidl in Germany, or if you're selling in the Far East, they will want to talk to you about your varietal innovation and the genetic material that you use. So to the average consumer, people talk about strawberries or grapes, but to the trading environment, this is not what people talk about. They talk about specific varieties within each one of these brackets. So now that you understand your market, you understand your product, you need to understand which varieties will cater to this specific window of demand and to the specific customer requirements that you have understood very clearly from that point. Once you understand these varieties, you need to carefully assess each variety to make sure that it works not just for the customer, but for the grower, because some varieties will be excellent for the customer. The customer will think they have a great flavor profile, for example, but they do not work for the grower. They are labor intensive. They are not as productive. They are difficult to grow. So you need to find that balance through research and trials, obviously, to find the variety that works well for both the grower as well as the customer, and make an informed choice there. Once you have identified that variety, you then need to move on to the following exercise, which is aligning with the breeding programs globally that are willing to provide this genetic material. You can do that through larger institutions in Egypt that have these alignments already and are willing to work with the sub-licensees, or you can actually approach entities like University of Florida in the United States, University of California, all these genetic powerhouses. You can approach them directly. And with Egypt now having an IPR law that is UPOV compliant, we have become an attractive country for breeders worldwide to look at us in a more favorable manner, because we now present an image of a country that respects intellectual property rights of breeders, and we are working hard to make sure that the laws are being enforced on the ground to give breeders the comfort that once they are in Egypt, their breeder rights and intellectual property be respected. So segment 1, demand-driven, work on the market. Segment 2, identify the varieties that cater to that market. And then you move on to the next slide, please, which is segment 3, and the operational innovation. Basically on operational innovation and environmental awareness, there are 2 points that everybody wants to make sure that you have them down, that you know exactly what you're doing with them, and they are, and as Mr. Tarek Tawfik has said, efficient water use and integrated plant protection. We are water scarce today, and we are approaching even a more critical water situation. And so when you are laying the foundation of your farm, now that you are back on the farm now, you know the varieties, you know everything you want to grow, you need to have an efficient water use protocol. You cannot start where everybody else or where a lot of people are using water inefficiently. You have to start at the cutting edge technology when it comes to water usage. You need to start using field moisture sensors. We have had good experience with that in the field. We have realized that if you give water on demand rather than just general irrigation programs, you can save up to 12% of your water usage, and that's coming from an efficient base already. So with minimal water use technology, you can save up to 10 to 12% of the amount of water you use on a crop like strawberries or grapes, even more on things like bananas. I've heard the same stories from our colleagues growing potatoes. So once you are setting up your operation, the first thing you need to address is how am I using my water, and am I being efficient when it comes to deployment of technology to use water efficiently. So this is a sustainability initiative that needs to be very clear in your value proposition. And finally there, obviously, when we talk about pesticide use today, we no longer say pesticide use, we say integrated plant protection. Integrated plant protection includes everything from use of pesticides, use of natural predators, and the technology that enables a farmer to do so. So basically, deployment of technology in integrated plant protection, like weather stations, for example. Weather stations today identify areas of risk. So rather than going in and spraying a large area with pesticides, the weather stations will identify, they have the software required, and they will identify areas of risk, and they will tell you, for example, plot A is a high risk category. You need to start applying there at this rate. Plot 2, 3, and 4 are no risk, do not apply anything there. So by the use of technology and the deployment of technology, you can actually minimize pesticide use. That's number one. Number two, when it comes to integrated plant protection, the introduction of natural predators is something that is highly effective and used globally now, where you can use natural predators to control the spread of some of the more damaging pests out there. And this again also minimizes the use of pesticides, and of course finally the adherence to the local laws of the Food Safety Authority, which has been doing quite a fantastic job actually over the past year in trying to achieve compliance on the packing level and the farm level. There's a new culture of food safety in Egypt today, and I think we need to leverage that and use that momentum to really enhance that food safety culture. So basically, with the minimization of pesticide use, you do have protocols, and you do have things like MRLs, maximum residue levels, and the PHIs, pre-harvest intervals between the application and the harvest times. So one needs to comply with all these local regulations. And of course, you need to comply with whatever regulations are in the market that you are exporting to. So if you're going to the European Union, you need to make sure you are in compliance with all the pesticide requirements of the destination market. So basically, when it comes to integrated plant protection, you have technology, you have natural predators, and you have general compliance with laws and regulations, whether locally or at the market of destination. Through these three areas that I hope I covered, you can basically package a very proper value proposition that I believe any trader or supermarket or receiver globally would look at very positively, would view the supplier very professionally, and it would give a new entrant into the market the opportunity to penetrate a new market without losing too much money to start with. I mean, you are going to lose a little at the beginning just to learn, but you're going to get to that profit point quite quickly. So hopefully I've covered a few things there, and I think I'm 5 minutes over time. Sorry about that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hatem. And actually, following the same line of thought of resource utilization, you provided a very nice correction to the ideology of how to, or what is the proper starting point for new entrants into the sector, while actually focusing so much on the process of reverse engineering to get the starting point right. Thank you very much for this. And now we can move to our last speaker for today, Dr. Aiki. The floor is all yours. I want to remind everyone to please keep your questions coming in the chat box so we can address them after our last speaker in the discussion part.
Excuse me. I'm sharing the wrong slide, sorry. I'm trying to share my slide, so permit me. Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you well.
So my name is Dr. Kelikume Ikechukwu. I'm a full-time faculty of the Lagos Business School. Precisely, I've been teaching agribusiness for the past 6 years. So I'm going to share some of my experience, and I'll probably will go down to the nitty-gritty, looking at the basics, the holistic view of the sector. Interestingly, the agricultural sector is currently one of the most important sectors in the Egyptian economy. The importance of the sector rests in the sector's contribution to health, wellness, food, shelter, employment, contribution to GDP, and linkage to the 17 SDG goals. Again, when you look at the sector contribution in terms of sectoral distribution, the sector currently contributes about 12% to the Egyptian GDP, which shows that it's a unique sector that has to be leveraged upon in terms of its contribution to foreign exchange earning the Egyptian economy. Again, when you look at the favorable Egyptian climate and the abundant Nile water, it allows for several opportunities. So I will be not looking at it in terms of, my colleagues have dealt well in looking at it in terms of technology, in terms of looking at it via other sectors. So, however, I want to look at it in terms of bringing in the entrepreneurship. The topic here is, the topic of interest is opportunities and entrepreneurship in the agricultural sector. So I rather want to look at it from that perspective. If you look at the ecosystem, the ecosystem is made up of a combination of agriculture and agribusiness. Agriculture, we know, is basically farming. Farming in crop production, farming in fishery, farming in forestry, and logging. And farming, when we look at it in terms of animal husbandry. Agribusiness, however, is a combination of agriculture and business. It involves an integrated system that links the entire agricultural ecosystem from farm to fork. The opportunities for the Egyptian entrepreneurs are in the value-added sector of the agriculture and agribusiness sector. The agribusiness value chain can, however, be categorized into 4 substructure, which I want us to look at. The first is the pre-upstream, which my colleague talked about briefly when he was looking at it in terms of logistics. But I will look at it broadly, not in terms of logistics, but across the sector. The pre-upstream sector. Now, this is a sector where you actually don't find entrepreneurs play in this sector because it requires huge sunk costs. So when you're talking about pest and disease management, you're talking about forest management, infrastructure development, quality control, quality testing, education, land management, especially when you're doing soil tests before you even begin to plant the crop, research. All of these are the pre-upstream. The active participants you find in this sector are the government, multinational firms, agric institution, research organization, multinational corporations coming into development banks and NGOs. However, when we look at the upstream, it takes us to direct farming, where you look at direct farming in crop production, livestock, fishery, and forestry. The active participant, the entrepreneurs you find in this space, play within the micro, small, medium enterprise. The interesting part of the agricultural sector narrative is that 80% of the players in this sector are small-scale farmers, whilst 20% are, you find the large-scale corporations play, the multinational firms that are into export of competitive crops in Egypt that are exportable. But however, you find very small players within the sectors. And these small players hardly understand some of the technicalities that my last colleague talked about. So when you're talking about irrigation, you're talking about greenhouse farming, you're talking about aeroponics, you're talking about hydroponics. The small scale farmers hardly understand what you're talking about. They are basically traditional cutlass and hoe farmers. But we're moving beyond the cutlass and hoe farmers to look at the agribusiness space. You now look at the midstream. The midstream, generally, we look at the logistics, the trade association, distribution, fabrication, sales, agro-journalism, commodity exchange, packaging, branding, storage, and fabrication. Now, the active participants you find here are those operating in the value-added space, those that are, you find multiple middlemen within this space, not adding value specifically, but moving crops, moving product from farm to market. So you find those that are highly fragmented sector where you have marketing, sales, trading activities, and fabrication services taking place. The final is the downstream sector. This is where you have large multinational firms playing the import and export sector. Basically for entrepreneurs within the Egyptian corridor and within the African corridor, we find more of these entrepreneurs play between the upstream and the midstream value chain. The downstream is usually a very expensive sector to play because you must meet international standard, international certification, international quality. So you find the multinational firms play in that space. But however, these multinational firms usually require the assistance of the middle players, that is those in the midstream, those aggregators, those that are aggregating commodities. They need their services to be able to get most of those things down to their sites. So who is the entrepreneur? What are the new opportunities in the agricultural and agribusiness sector? So the entrepreneur is a great thinker, is an idealist and an innovator. She is a creator of something new, something extraordinary, or a business that begins and sometimes ends with him or her. The typical entrepreneur is a risk taker who organizes other factors of production, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurial abilities for a reward that could sometimes end in losses. The typical entrepreneur may have the fund for investment, the land for cultivation, and great ideas about a new venture in agribusiness value chain. However, funding and physical resources may not translate into sustainable investment in the sector. The major challenge often faced by young entrepreneurs in the sector is not money. So if we carry out a statistics and analysis of what do you require to go into the sector, half the time what you hear is that we don't have fund, we don't have land, we need fund. The challenge is not funding, but the challenge is absence of knowledge, and information as well as skills that will enable these players actively play in the sector. Agriculture as is currently constituted is 70% science, 20% experiential learning, mentorship and handholding, and 10% art, passion. The interesting part of this narrative is that most would be, and those who enter into the sector because they are passionate about the sector. They discount the scientific part of agriculture. They discount the experiential learning, the mentorship and the handholding. And they move on with the fact that, oh, my fathers, my uncles, I watched them do this thing before, so I can do it. Most startups in the sector fail because they actually discount the scientific and the experiential learning part of agriculture. It's important for would-be entrepreneur, those who want to enter into the sector, to have both soft skills and hard skills. So this is one of the missing tools or missing things in the sector. The would-be entrants, they enter into the sector without the requisite knowledge and the requisite skill that will enable them operate successfully in the sector. Now, what are soft skills? These are skills that are not readily obtained. They are skills that you don't necessarily obtain them from the classroom. They are skills that you obtain through personal, long-term personal development. And they include stress management. Agriculture generally requires patient capital. There are some cash crop that you plant and you have to wait for a long while before you start harvesting. Agriculture requires patient capital. Agriculture requires managing farm hands and managing people. The most difficult set of people to manage are the daily labor that you hire to work for you on the farmland. Leadership qualities, ability to inspire people, management of your time, communication skills, all of these are things that you do not learn from the traditional or conventional classroom setting. It also requires team management, managing people to achieve results. These skills are personal attributes that helps position an entrepreneur in the sector for sustained growth. However, there is the part that requires the classroom learning. So these are skills developed through direct learning. These skills can be obtained through direct learning in the classroom. As an agribusiness entrepreneur, you need training in the following area: technical skills of the sector that you're actually going into. You need, for example, you're going into management of tractors and equipment, heavy-duty earth-moving equipment. You need to learn how to move this earth-moving equipment. Managerial skills, bookkeeping, and basic accounting record. Most farmers or most agribusiness operators do not have basic accounting skills. They do not know the difference between their assets and their liabilities. Marketing and sales skills, money management skills, and financial literacy. Without significant investment in the hard and soft skills, the agribusiness entrepreneur may find it difficult to grow the business beyond a small scale level. What then are the opportunities? The major opportunities can be found in Egypt agricultural export crops. So what are the current export crops? You have the citrus, you have the potato, onion, grape, garlic, mango, strawberry, green beans, guava, cucumber, bell pepper, and eggplant. Interestingly, you see, when you add rice into this figure, Egypt actually produces rice, but not in commercial quantity. And they are also not competitive in the production of rice. So let's just explore one of these crops, and you see how we can dissect the value chain to include so many people within this value chain. Let's look at onion. Egypt currently is the third world producer of onion, with an annual production of about 3.1 million metric tons and a yield of about 36,705 kilograms per hectare. So if we look at this scale, what are the opportunities? You have the pre-upstream where you have research institutes. So this is where we find the researchers. Farmers generally will not get into research. It is those in the educational sectors that will get into research. What are the best quality seeds? When should we plant? What region performs better than other region? It is the researcher that will come with all of this. So you find government play in that space. Government will provide what? Each time we talk about climate change, each time we talk about water shortage, each time we talk about pests and diseases, the poor farmer The 80% smallholder farmer cannot address these problems. We need government to play in infrastructure, irrigation, subsidy, and grants to the smallholder farmer. The upstream. So here you find direct farmers who are engaged in onion production. Again, you find greenhouse farmer. You know, one of the things we say about the Egyptian is lack of water. However, science and technology comes in here where you now have greenhouses, farming in greenhouses, where you have aeroponics and hydroponics play significantly in the production of certain crops. So you have large and small scale input suppliers, irrigation technology, soil management. Takes us to the midstream, where you have processing, distribution, packaging, warehousing, transport and logistics, marketing and sales, advisory services. All of these players are actually operating in the agribusiness space, but they are not in direct farming. Again, you have the large-scale farmers who are into export of dry onion to various parts of the world. Interestingly, when you look at the top onion producers in the world, you have China, you have India, you have Egypt as number 3. However, when we look at the yield, you will see that the Egyptian yield is better than the Chinese and the Indian yield. So what this means is that if we intensify productivity in Egypt, we're likely to do better than these countries that are actually doing 19 million metric tons per annum. So in closing, because I was told I have 15 minutes, I knew there wasn't going to be enough time to do an elongated. So opportunities lies in the value-added sector. If the country focuses on its strengths and educates the masses, Egypt will not only increase its productivity in sectors where it has competitive advantage, but will also what? Drive productivity across the sector, in addition to employing more people, especially when you look at the 33 million workforce, employing more people engaged in the value-added space in agriculture. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aiki, and thank you again for sticking to the time. We have some very interesting questions coming up in the chat, so let me share them with you one at a time. For Mr. Tarek, there was a question saying that given that the agriculture sector, as you mentioned, is a deregulated sector, can the private enterprises that work in this sector play an important role in sustainability without any interference from the government?
Well, I mean, generally speaking, there is the interference in the government is not in the agricultural operation itself. You know, it is in the pre-operations and the post-operations. So when we talk about logistics, yes, you know, there is bureaucracy, there is red tape. When it comes to importation of seeds, when it comes to importation of equipment or of supplies, there is bureaucracy that impedes or hampers that. There is a problem again with giving licensing, with the land registration, land allocation. So, I mean, even though that the government is not engaged into the processing operation itself, you know, the regulatory private, you know, to a great extent creates a lot of impediments, you know, for a smoother operation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Hatem, there are actually two questions there. So the first one is discussing the profitability of the sector and given the financial risks that are associated with the agribusiness today, do you think loan incentives to young adults and fresh grads to invest in agriculture can help maintain and develop the agriculture sector? And the second question is, what sources would you recommend to view these price changes on the global space of agriculture products and how to track product history and identify the gaps that you've been talking about?
Okay, so when it comes to loan incentives, we can talk about the first point first. When proceeding with agriculture, I mean, we're always very careful when taking on new debt. You always have to be very careful as to where your debt servicing capacity stands. When you build your financial model, you have to understand how much debt you can take on, and that is based on the price levels you will sell at. That is based on the profitability on an operational level, and then once you factor in your SMA and all of that, you need to make sure that you can service that debt. Loan incentives can definitely help. So for example, there are the loans now at reduced interest rates, some at 8% and some maybe even lower. And these definitely help a lot with people wanting to enter the agricultural space. But my advice, whenever you're taking on loan in the agricultural space, look at your debt servicing capacity very well from the beginning, and understand your debt to equity level also very well from the beginning. The agricultural space is not one where you should be looking to over leverage the operation to thinking that you will maximize returns this way. So understand your debt servicing from the very beginning, and your debt to equity should, in my opinion, should definitely not exceed 1-to-1, and 1-to-1 is actually stretching it. But in terms of loan incentives, I think yes, this does help a lot, of course. And there are loans today for medium-sized enterprises at 8% that can work very well. In terms of the second question, understanding we're doing the price homework, I think this is a very extensive market research. There are resources available to look at product prices, but I tend to prefer actually going to the market. So for example, if you have Europe in mind, you need to do your own research within the, say, for example, you target the supermarket sector in the European environment. You need to actually go there. You need to collect your own price points. You need to understand that over a period of time to be specific with where the gap is. Because if you look at whatever resources are available online, you can get some misleading information. They can be very averaged up figures, grossed up figures, whatever. So you need to collect your pricing from the market. There are market research companies that do that today. You can invest in that exercise. You can commission a market research company to do that for you, collect the price points in specific markets that you want. So that is the more, it's a more expensive way. You can do it yourself, but I would vote for outsourcing that exercise to some of the market research companies out there today.
Let me add another question that just came our way just now. Someone was asking, what role do you think big corporates can play to support startups that work in that field? So he's saying, we see abroad some innovation labs and accelerators in this field sponsored by agri-food corporates.
I think a very important point that Mr. Tawfik mentioned at the beginning is consolidated farming or formalized contract farming. So big corporates can help smaller farmers, and smaller farmers can help big corporates as well. So for example, if a big agri company approaches a farmer with or a small farmer approaches a big company and they have 2 or 3 acres, then it becomes a less attractive prospect or a very difficult arrangement to get going. But if a group of smaller farmers and a group or small entrants consolidate together and approach one of the bigger companies in terms of, say we have 50 acres or 25 acres plus, for example, then big companies would be surely interested to discuss a formalized contract farming approach where they can actually outsource to these young new entrants a product mix. They can tell them what the product mix needs to be with an agreement to offtake the product. They can help them in setting up their economic model. Some companies I know today help with the cost of the seedlings, the pesticides, but that has to work both ways. So that the proposition has to be attractive to the big company as well as the new entrants. and it all lies in two things: consolidation and formalized contract farming. So it has to be a consolidated plot. There has to be some form of a contract, a binding contract between both entities.
I'd like to add a couple of things to what Hatem said. I mean, one of the advices I would say, in farming, the main issue here is cash flow management. It's not about profit and loss. If you don't have the available cash on time, your plants are not going to wait for fertilizers or water. If they don't get it today, tomorrow it's not going to work. So cash flow management is one of the key issues. When we talk about, big corporates, yes, definitely, it is a demand-driven approach, and again, a lot of the entrepreneurs or small farmers, they want to speculate. In my experience over the years, you sell back to back, you don't speculate on a commodity. You'd rather have a fixed price, a cost price, rather than speculate for a high profit or lose it all. So this is, again, that a lot of people fall into a trap. When we talk about also entrepreneurs and penetrating, markets abroad, definitely they have to have a clear value proposition and what niche do they have and what would make them different than others. When you talk about exports, exports is becoming a tailored product. It's not when you talk about the crop, strawberries, beans. There are so many tailored crops, that are demand, are a consumer choice. Once you identify where the consumer choice is, and you cater to it by excellence, this is where you have a niche, and this is where you can excel, and this is what would put you up against, all the other players in the market.
So can I add to that? We have a company, we have a large multinational company that entered Ghana some years ago, Blue Sky, known as Blue Sky Company. Blue Sky is into fresh cut pineapples. So they entered the market. The market was highly unstructured with small scale farmers, and they started redefining the market and redefining the products that they were going to sell and trade internationally. So they came up with schools. They were giving lectures to farmers. They were giving seeds to farmers. They also did one unique thing they did was that they started bringing in standards into the Ghanaian Pineapple Farmers Association. So they put the farmers into cluster groups. They put the farmers into cooperative unions, and they were able to assist the farmers by mentoring, by coaching, by helping them get funds from the banking sector, and by structuring the pineapple industry in Ghana. We also have companies like West African Cotton in Nigeria that are into sesame seed and sesame oil. So they supply the European market with sesame oil and sesame seed. So they're able to aggregate women and small-time farmers, put them in cooperative in order to get the quality raw materials that they need to produce their product. Olam's is also an international company that has integrated backward by assisting and guaranteeing that small-scale farmers can upscale the quality and quantity of products that they produce. So it's both ways, it runs both ways. Thank you.
Dr. Ake, actually you touched on a point that was related to the question that I received for you, which is what are the basic or the common requirements to have before actually seeking support from national or international organizations? So what are the basic requirements that need to be secured before you can reach out for local institutions or international ones?
So one of the requirements that you need in order to reach out to institutions is that you have, see, agriculture is not about, one of the things we say, I asked my participants in class is that, what is the size of your farm? So agriculture, it is usually measured in terms of what? Hectares. We say yield per hectares. So you find farmers who have a plot, 2 plots of land, say they are farmers. So if you have 2 plots of land, it's about volume here. So you cannot approach multinational firms that are looking at filling their containers to export abroad when you do not have the quantity to export. So it is about, have you upgraded to the level where firms, international firms, can actually see you as a supplier of the crops that they need. Again, approaching the banks means that you need a structure, you need a well-tailored structure, you need a business plan. You cannot approach any bank without a well-tailored plan, a well-tailored business plan. You cannot approach the banks if you do not have a structured business. Most small-scale farmers do not have a structured business. They don't have accounting record. They don't have business record. So when they approach the bank has no real reason why they should invest in such an enterprise. So for young entrepreneurs, they need to do business the way business is done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And actually, one final question is, what are the local companies and entities that work in the value chain that Mr. Hatem and Mr. Tarek were talking about? And we actually have a chart with the local entities that work in each phase of this value chain.
it is not a structured map, but I mean, the value, the market has evolved dramatically over the years, rather than having companies that were vertically integrated, whereby, they did everything from farm to fork, the agricultural sector evolved, and there has been a remarkable improvement in the contracting and the subcontracting possibilities, which created, again, more focus on the farming and more focus on the industry and more focus on the logistics. But if you want to have names, there are plenty of names. We have a whole list of all the operators in the sector, whether downstream or upstream or midstream. For example, we have the Chamber of Food Industries, we have a whole list of companies involved into the sector. You have also in the here horticulture organization, association, again, it has a whole list of participants in the upstream operation and to the farming operation. So the Food Export Council and the Agriculture Export Council, has a whole list of players into the export, let alone, of course, the known midstream, logistics, when it comes also to the retailers, the warehousing companies. Yes, there is a whole database available for all the players in the sector, both in farming, both into farm-related activities like poultry, like fisheries, like milk production, animal feed. Yes, absolutely. It's quite a developed market from the private sector perspective, I have to admit.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hatem, would you like to add anything to that question, to that point?
No, it's thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much for everyone. Thank you to the distinguished speakers, and thank you to the attendees. And we apologize for taking a bit extra time from everyone. I believe everyone has enjoyed very much the discussion today. It was a very valuable information and very valuable discussion. Thank you all very much, and have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.